Hello, everybody. My name is Kanan Townsend. I am the Director of Education and Public Programs at the Robert Van Ness Museum located in Farmville, Virginia. And here we have Mr. Robert Van Ness, who is the creator slash host of the Virginia History Podcast.
How you doing, guys?
Is that a good title for you?
Yeah. Creator, producer, whatever you want to call me. Guy that reads books and talks about it.
You are the Virginia History Podcast. How about a word like that?
That's fine, certainly. Yes, sir.
So Robert and I connected probably a couple of years ago now, maybe 2 years.
I think it's been about 2 years. Yeah.
During the Virginia Evolution stuff that was happening, he interviewed me at the Moton Museum, and I was featured on his podcast. So go back and listen to that episode, and I will shamelessly plug that. But yeah, so Robert's how long have you been running the podcast?
Since about 2015. I started in October 2015. Mm-hmm.
2015. So it's been 5 years.
Yeah, I can't believe that. That's amazing.
5 years, and it's a great podcast, and we'll be plugging it throughout this whole episode, certainly. But so tell us a little bit of background about the podcast, a little bit of background on yourself. How'd you get interested in hosting a podcast about Virginia history?
I'll try to make a long story short, or maybe a short story long, whichever way you want to look at it. But I've had a passion for history since I was a kid. My dad was in the Navy, so we moved all over the place. In one instance, I was up in upstate New York, right next to a house that was used for the Underground Railroad. Another instance, I had the airfield where Charles Lindbergh took off to fly across the Atlantic. It was literally in my backyard.
Wow.
So I've moved around the country a lot, and I've had history just everywhere. But at the same time, even though it was everywhere, I really took it for granted. I enjoyed it. I loved it. I researched it all the time. But American history just wasn't my passion. It just it was too common. I hate to say that because it's not common, especially when you start digging below the surface. You find all sorts of undercurrents and connections and such like that. But my passion started to drift more toward ancient history, and then unrelated early modern Europe, which is what I studied in college. And then I went away and I taught in Northern Illinois for a number of years. And then I got out of teaching, but I still had the passion in my blood to do something history. Though I wasn't in the teaching field or the academic field anymore, I started looking at things like blogging. I started looking at other writing avenues. But then I had a former student of mine who started podcasting, and he was bouncing some ideas off of me, and it was new to me. I was like, what is podcasting? I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But he started one. He's been very successful, Maritime History Podcast. And then just talking to him and seeing what he was doing, I got interested in it. And I said, there's nobody doing a podcast specifically on Virginia history. So I started looking around a little bit more, gathering information, seeing what I needed to do to get into podcasting. And I said, I'll give it a shot. Started out kind of rough, trying to get used to talking in front of a microphone with nobody in a room.
Right.
That's not easy for anyone who's ever done that. As a teacher, it's easy. You got 15, 20, 30 kids in front of you, and they bounce ideas off you, and you're just kind of give and take. But the microphone doesn't talk back to you, and you just kind of feel silly.
Right.
But I started doing that 2015, as I said. And because I grew up a lot here in Virginia, Dad being in the Navy, Norfolk is where we were stationed for a good majority of the time. I did all the trips around the state, the Monticellos, Mount Vernons, Jamestown, Williamsburg, and all of that. So I already had a basic understanding. But then I decided, I'm here. I work for one of the oldest families in the state, one of what we would call the first families of Virginia, the Tolliver family. So my full-time job is farming. I manage a farm for them. And because of those connections with all the farms throughout the state, some of which are still historic, they grow for us. We develop soybeans through a different program throughout the state, and we sell that seed to farmers throughout the state who are on these historic properties and locations. And I said, well, hey, I've got a number of locations. I've got a number of contacts. I've got some of the knowledge. Why not try this out? So that's exactly what I did. and then it started to grow from there.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I hadn't heard of it before we met, but after we met, I subscribed, and I'm still a subscriber. And I do
Appreciate
my
it.
best to listen as much as I can, because I think you bring up an important point. I mean, I don't think that there was anybody else who was doing
Right.
anything like that. I mean, certainly
Sure.
you could find 100 American history podcasts, but
Right.
specifically focusing on Virginia, which has such a rich history, and I'd say often you could throw a rock in any direction, anywhere, and hit something historic in Virginia,
Absolutely.
because of how
You might not even know it, right?
yeah, exactly. You might know what it is, certainly, but
Right. Right. I mean,
you can
there's a connection right up the street here to Moton, for instance. It's about a mile away from where I live.
oh,
With the school incidents here in Norfolk during that same time, the Norfolk 17, I believe you call it, correct?
yes,
Is the name
uh-huh,
there? There's a sign not very far. I could walk to it.
yeah,
That's how close I am. So you're right. It is everywhere. And what I like to tell people when I go visit places like Moton Museum and yourself and others who I've interviewed, is the work that I try to do with the podcast is covering all of the in-between material. So yes, I cover the Jamestowns, and I will be covering American War for Independence and Civil War and so on. But there's an enormous amount of history between those high point events
right,
that is often overlooked, partly because the resource material isn't there. A lot
yep,
of it was destroyed during the Civil War. Um, but still it needs to be told because it's the glue that holds it all together, that makes sense of what's going on throughout that period up until where we are today. So it's absolutely my focus and my goal as I continue to unfold the narrative to cover a lot of that material, which is what I'm doing right now, even with the series that I'm doing about the first families of Virginia, the
right.
founders of those families, how they came into the state, what they went through to grow, their influence, their impact, both positive, negative, all of that type of material.
So 5 years you've been running this podcast, right? And
Yes,
so
sir.
how do you, like, with a state like Virginia, I mean, how do you, I guess, compartmentalize? Like, how do you pick what topics to cover? Because I'm assuming it's not like I'm not assuming, I know it's not like a direct timeline, like, oh, here's 1607 or whatever, and
Right.
now we're, how do you decide what topics to cover? Does it kind of, it kind of kind of vary?
At first, I wanted to do narrative chronological.
Hmm.
Very easy when you're coming through Jamestown to do that.
Yeah.
Once you start branching away from Jamestown, however, that's much more difficult. So that's why I'm starting to incorporate more of a biographical angle to it, showing the first families of Virginia. So I got up to the 1660s, going through Governor William Barclay. Then I said, I can't keep going here because if I do that, I'm going to miss so many other important factors here. So I'm still doing chronological, but I've kind of paused that for a second to bring in all of these characters that were huge during the 17th century into the 18th century. Um, so yeah, it's a combination of chronological, and then I take little not periods, little portions, and I just kind of break them out to cover them a little bit more directly that way. And then I'll come right back into the narrative and then move forward chronologically, and then I'll break out again as I need to. So I find that doing that in a lot of ways covers a lot of history, and it allows me to bring up some more geographical, like an episode I was talking about Yorktown, because it just kind of it fit into what I was talking about chronologically in the 1630s. So
Right.
some involvement there, building there, and then that chronological approach isn't always the easiest, but it does allow me to bring in a lot of extra that would often get overlooked.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you truly, I mean, my guess that you were a history teacher when you taught, is my
Yes.
assumption. Yeah, and it's such a difficult thing because of the way the standards are set up. I mean, regardless of what state
Right.
you're in, but like there's just so much like that you can't talk about,
Right.
and it's so important, because without some of the stuff that gets left out, you lose some of the context, and it's just
Right.
difficult. And so I appreciate your the way in which you talk about and do the podcast in terms of, here, we need a full history, we need a full context,
Right.
here's everything that happens. If we miss this, you're not going to understand why this governor did what they did, and this,
Certainly.
that, and the other. So I think that's a great. I think we share a similar philosophy. Yeah, it's not timely. In terms
Right.
of it's not the quickest thing to do, but like you have to understand this type of context so you can understand why the American Revolution happened and whatever else.
Right.
So and so that's interesting. And you said it's been 5 years, and you said you're still in the 1660s.
That's right. It's taken me 5 years to get there because I have that full-time job, and it
Yeah.
doesn't allow me to really focus on it the way I'd like to. But I do generally about an episode a month. If I'm lucky, I can get out two.
Yeah.
But with the research, the writing, the editing, that does take a good amount of time. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't want to just throw it together and then just throw it out there and it be half baked. I want to spend some
Yeah.
time on it. And that's key to the story.
Right.
With any kind of content, story is absolutely key. And if you don't have the story right, it's going to fall apart. And Virginia's got an incredible story, 400 years worth. I hope to be able to cover the high points at least in my lifetime, but 5 years and I'm only in the 1660s. I've got my work cut out for me.
But I think that's a testament to how much history there is too. I wasn't saying like you're going slow, but like I'm
Right. No, I understand.
How do you even like? Yeah, I can't imagine you going much faster.
Certainly. To put it in perspective, I think I've written about 100,000 words to get where I'm at. So,
yeah.
I've got a number of supporters who've told me I need to edit that and get it out in book form, and I need to do that. But I got to find the time to do that.
Right. Yeah, so. It's difficult because you're working full time. You said you're a farmer, but so you kind of do this as just because you think it's fun and important to do.
Certainly.
And so how, like, what goes into making a podcast? Like, I don't like what type of research. You said you had to do a lot of research. Like, how much time does it take for you to make one episode? And then if there's like, what kind of equipment, I guess, and stuff like that. Show us some of the nuts and bolts.
Sure. Yeah. So before we started this meeting, I was trying to use my podcast mic for this, but it wasn't allowing us to talk back and forth. But this is the microphone I use. Not very expensive. You can buy it on Amazon for $80, I think. So it's a simple plug and play. When I saw that it didn't cost a whole lot of money to get into podcasting, I said, well, then why not? What's holding me back? Now, one additional thing that I do use quite a bit, which from our time, I like to bring my camera around with me. I fancy myself somewhat of an amateur photographer. You mentioned the American Evolution. Actually, I'll throw this out there. A little pat on the back for myself. But they did a photography contest, which I won.
I saw that. That was great.
So that was exciting. I about passed out. They called me while I was at work, and I had to make sure I didn't pass out. It really shocked me. Yeah. But I like bringing the camera around because with a lot of content online, you can get a lot of the verbal. But since I live here in Virginia, I can go places. I can bring it alive with that camera, so I can talk about it and say, "Hey, go to my show notes page. You're going to see some behind the scenes stuff. You're going to see those pictures of what this place was. Get a feel, get a sense of what people were going through. Like, say, for instance, James Ford at Jamestown. You can see it's see-through. It's threadbare. You look at it and think, how is this going to protect me from an attack? They were thinking they were going to protect themselves against the Spanish. Not a chance. Spanish would have obliterated them had it come to that kind of battle. So you get a sense of the state, the beauty within the state, some of the hardships within the state, some of the benefits of the state through my camera lens. So basically I'm using the microphone, the camera for my content tools. As far as research, I read a lot. I like to read. I have an extensive library, and I'm always buying books, and I'm always online looking for more, much to my wife's chagrin.
I understand that.
Moved a few times, and moving 1,500 books or so is not pleasant.
Right.
So, but there is a lot of reading, and thankfully I enjoy it. So it's not for me a drudgery. I'm like, this is great. I like to learn new things. I like to put these stories together, see the connections. They fascinate me. They really do.
Right. So how many hours would you say go into making one episode, or does it depend?
Minus research, generally speaking, say a 30-minute episode takes me an hour or so to record. Again, that talking into a mic that doesn't talk back to you, sometimes you get tongue-tied.
Right.
Then I go through and I edit, I put music in, just to kind of break the story into sections. And then I have my intro, outro, that kind of stuff. So generally about an hour to record, and maybe a couple of hours to edit, just to make sure everything is right, the sound is right. As far as research, that's just ongoing. I don't know how to put a time period on, or time frame on that. I generally read an hour in the morning and an hour at night if I can. And then it's just always something that's related to Virginia,
Right.
constantly, whether it's in the period I'm in now or doing future research. So,
What's something good that you're reading right now?
I'll put a plug in for him. There's a historian at the Library of Virginia. His name is Brent Tarter. He had finished a book back in November that is called Virginia and Their Histories. It's coming out here in a few weeks. In May, I think, is the official launch date. But he and I got in contact back before Christmas, and we're gonna do an episode together. I'm gonna discuss his book, introducing it and such like that. So, fascinating book. I'll tell you. I'm about halfway through it, and it's wonderful. It really is. It puts the story together in a very succinct way. Which you talk about different subject and such like that, but that was a multi-year project for him that he had to go ahead and condense from a multi-volume series into one, which is amazing in the way he did it. The clarity, the concision that he did it's top notch. Right. So I'm looking forward to that interview and his getting that book out. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, feel free to plug all you want. That's exactly what this is about. We want our listeners to come away with a lot of resources, and I think that's something that folks would, especially because we're quarantined. I mean, we don't have anything else as read and hang out with those in our household. So give them something good to read. So do you do a fair amount of traveling for the podcast as well?
I do, as much as I possibly can. I generally, for those who live in Virginia, you understand there's a couple of seasons you don't want to do any traveling in, July and January. You never know what the weather is going to be like then. In July, you always know what it's going to be like. It's going to be hot, humid, and you don't want to walk anywhere. My history trips, as we call them in the family, are somewhat legendary in that I generally pick a region, and if I know I'm going there, I'll reach out to different museums and houses and sites in the region, and I try to hit as many of them as I can in one day. So that could be very fast paced. So like for instance, let's see here, back in November, I was in the Northern Neck, and I started all the way north in the Northern Neck, and I worked my way from Stratford Hall to Leholme all the way down to Kilmarnock, hitting I think 15 sites in between. Almost all of them off the beaten path, not places that people just go to as tourist sites, but those locations that are somewhat buried into the soil of Virginia that unless you know they're there, you kind of go by them. There may be a marker there. Nobody really pays attention. But I wanted to pay attention to them. So that kind of stuff. So.
And I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but what's one of your favorite spots that you have visited, or a couple top three, favorite spots?
Top three
sites.
All right, first one that comes to mind has got a family connection. So I mentioned the picture there for American Evolution. That was at Berkeley Plantation in Charles City. That has got a special family connection for us. Because of the farming, I generally work on Thanksgiving or during those dates. Harvest doesn't stop because it's a holiday. So for us, Thanksgiving has kind of become that Berkeley Plantation anniversary that they do for the first Thanksgiving in Virginia. So we go there every year, and it's a great place to go. The venue is nice. The people are nice. It's wonderful. So get a chance this coming, the first week of November, the first Sunday of November. They do that every year. go. It's wonderful if you've never gone. It's a great venue. So they rank highly for me. There's a lot of history there, given the fact that you had settlers come in 1619. They were obliterated during the Indian Uprising. Come back a few years later and build Berkeley up the way they did. There's Civil War history there. There's American War for Independence history there. You have a president from there. The Harrison family owned it, so the Harrison family is a major family in Virginia. So there's just an enormous amount of history there. You can feel it, breathe it, see it everywhere.
Right.
That's high on my list. Jamestown, Jamestown was one of those places that when I was a kid, I was just fascinated by. I was always building little Jamestown forts wherever I was going and playing around with army men in them. But Jamestown's always going to hold a special place in my heart. So that one would be up there. And then Monticello. I've always enjoyed Monticello. I finally got to take my wife there. She's not a Virginian. She's from Illinois. So we took the family up there back in, October, I guess. The first time the boys had seen it, I got a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they fell in love with it. I didn't know what they were going to think. Normally they're like, oh, Dad's taking us on another trip.
Yeah.
Right. They genuinely enjoyed it. They were fascinated by it. And they do a great job in their tours and the way they show off the location. It's top notch, really is. So I'm sure there's some others that I'm leaving out, but those three seem to spring to mind quite often.
So y'all have heard it here. His recommendations once we leave this COVID-19 pandemic hopefully behind us, and very soon.
Yes, get out there and travel.
Yeah, and Virginia. Yeah, there's just so many sites. I couldn't even. We could literally spend this whole time just naming sites and
Absolutely.
nothing else. Big sites, small sites, medium size. But anyways, but that's great. What I guess going towards the ending, I guess. What would you recommend? Like, what advice would you give somebody who is trying to start a podcast, kind of in general? I mean, not necessarily on Virginia history, but like, what advice would you give somebody who's trying to start a podcast and get their name out there?
From experience and talking to others, a lot of people don't start anything creative because they generally are afraid to do it. As in they don't know how to do it, or they feel like they need to know everything they possibly can about how to do it before they do it. You're never going to know everything before you do it.
Right.
I forget who said it. Basically, they said something along the lines of, you do it 1,000 times just to become mediocre. I'm at that level. I'm not mediocre yet. I've got a little bit more than 70 episodes out now, between interviews and my own work.
Right.
You're always learning, but do it. And as you're doing it, you're going to get better. And I hope by now, episode 72 that's upcoming, I hope I'm better than episode 1.
Right.
But just do it. There's no reason not to, especially in this time. People are at home. Learn how to do something new. Give it a shot. Give it a try. Especially if you have something that let the world know what it is. Talk about it. Do it. Try it. What's the worst that could possibly happen in that situation? I mean, no reason not to try. I would say, from a creative standpoint, it's very difficult to do something extremely broad. Now, I say that, and here I am doing Virginia history, which has got a 400-year lifespan, very broad.
Yeah.
But if I did the history of the United States, it would be impossible. I know many historians that they look at that and then they say, no, I need to find my niche. And when they find their niche, they become well known for that. Very well known. Friend of mine, Ed Lingell, very well known for George Washington. Now, he's branched out into a few other things, but he spent a good portion of his early life doing George Washington, and he's always going to be known for that.
Right.
And he made that his niche. So, just like you've made Robert Moton your niche.
Yeah.
can always point people to you to find out about Moton Museum and everything going on there.
And I think that's important, man. I think having an eclectic kind of knowledge base is important, but
Right.
there's only so much one person, one organization, can focus on and do it justice. And I think
Right.
that that's an important thing for anybody who's looking. So we recently launched a podcast, very low key, but it's we call it the mailbag.
Okay.
This is about that, so I'm not going to talk that much about that. But it's essentially it's a weekly listener question show, and where
Sure.
folks can submit questions about basically civil rights,
Hmm.
60s, 50s, 60s, 70s kind of history. So it's gotten off okay so far. It's just hard being consistent. I feel like having some type of schedule is super important when you're starting a podcast. Because I
Right.
feel like some folks are just, I'm going to start a podcast, be really enthusiastic in the beginning. And then like, oh yeah, it's been like 4 months. It's been however long since I put an episode up. It's like, well, you can't build a listener base if you're not having some sort of
Right. That
consistency.
that's a good point. A lot of people will start one and they have the idea that they're going to do one a week, one a day. It's easy to get burnt out when you overextend yourself. One a month for me is good. I'd like to do more, but time constraints that just doesn't allow. But you
Right.
just got to know what your limitations are. And for me, I know, hey, the end of every month, I'm going to try to get something out. I don't put a specific date on it. I know a lot of people like to do that. Because of my schedule with work, I can never say I'm going to do it on this day every time or every month.
Right.
But knowing your limitations is a big key to that for you and your listeners, and certainly being consistent is key.
Do you are there, this isn't about other podcasts, but are there other podcasts that you listen to that either kind of inspire you or just kind of you mentioned that your student had that podcast earlier, but are there other podcasts you listen to or really like that you think other folks should listen to as well?
Certainly, I listen to a number of different historians. A couple of them that I really enjoy. Different perspectives. I like Tom Woods, his viewpoint a lot. He really challenges, makes you think about things in a different way. His background is U.S. history, but now he's branched out into a number of different things, economics, government, and such. Um, but I mentioned already the Maritime History podcast. Other than that, I do a fair bit of audiobooks. I do have a long commute to work, so I use that for reading, so to speak.
Right.
But outside of that, no, not really. Kind of drawing a blank right now. I know a number of podcasters, um, but right now my mind's gone blank. I'm sorry.
No,
Maybe I'd give something for a show notes page. But
no, no worries. Those are good suggestions. Um, I think we're coming to a close. Unless is there anything else that you would want to share about yourself, about your podcast that I haven't had a chance to ask already?
no, I think we've covered a fair amount.
Gotcha. Well, that's great. So just one more time for the folks, just if you want to share, just name your podcast, any of your social media information or anything else you're working on that they can keep
Okay.
tabs on you about.
Easiest way to find me, well, you can find me on social media. I've got a Virginia History Podcast Instagram. I post infrequently on there, but frequently enough to say that I do it often. And then I've also got the webpage for the show notes page and everything else that I do for the podcast. That's vahistorypodcast.com. And then I've got Facebook for it. You can find me on there, subscribe, follow me there. I do send out the podcast to all the podcast outlets. So you can look me up on whatever your favorite podcast provider is. iTunes, generally, once you're on iTunes, generally it goes everywhere.
Right.
So I'm on Stitcher, Podbay, you can name them. They're on all of it. I also do send them. I don't do video right now. I'm considering that for the future. That'd be a new avenue to get into. But the audio portion of the podcast does go to YouTube, so you can find me there as well.
Nice.
Look up my name, I believe. Oh, well, either way, Virginia History Podcast or my name. I think it'll come up for both. But definitely the easiest way to follow me and the work that I do is probably Facebook, and then also on the podcast webpage itself.
Okay.
Other work that I do outside of farming and, and researching for this, I don't know that there's much more time.
I understand that. Well, hopefully some folks who are watching, listening will pick up on it and listen. It is a great podcast. If y'all feel like scrolling back a while, y'all can hear my interview with Robert a couple of years ago. You might be scrolling for a bit, but he really does some great work. So I hope you'll
remember correctly here. It's February or March 2018, something like that.
Sounds right.
But either way, you can find it pretty easily if you go to the podcast website. I've got a tab there for interviews. Click on it, and there's Kanan Townsend interview right there.
Nice. Yeah, because it was for the 2019 American Evolution, but it wasn't in 2019. Like it was like we were like way early, or there was like a pre kind of leading up to the 2019 thing. So
that's right. Yeah, they contacted me actually at Berkeley Plantation. Interesting story there, but they said, hey, let's do some work together. You're covering 1619 right now, and the first interview they give me was somebody that had nothing to do with 1619. I was glad for it though, because I was very glad to meet you, and we hit it off. I mean, it was a good time, but it was interesting that they did that, and I'm like, oh, okay, all right. And in fact, you were my first interview, so that was good all the way around.
I don't think I knew that, but that is funny. That American Evolution 1619. Oh yeah, go to this little civil rights museum in the mid 20th century, like.
Yeah, but it connects. It absolutely connects when you weave the story together. It absolutely makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully you all will follow Robert and the Virginia History Podcast. It is a great listen. But other than that, thank you, Robert, so much for joining me here this evening, and we'll let you know when it's going to post.
I appreciate it, Kanan. Thank you. Have a good night.
Absolutely. Thanks. You too. All right. So